Suhaib. And then I see another person. I can't tell what their name is, but if we could go around and just share, your name, maybe what school do you go to, and what. Maybe another question is how is this Ramadan different for you than other Ramadans? So I can go ahead and get started. My name is Mohammad Omary. I graduated from NC State around 2 years ago. Alhamdulillah, right now I work as an engineer. And this Ramadan has been different for me. And like I stated, in that we haven't been able to go perform Taraweeh together, but Alhamdulillah, we've been doing it as a family in our house together. So let's go around. I don't know, maybe Suhaib, if you could just introduce yourself.
Yes, assalamualaikum.
Hello.
So, my name is Suhaib Musa. I'm 14 years old. I go to Holly Grove Middle, and Ramadan has been different this year. Like you said, we haven't been able to go to Taraweeh. We haven't been able to see people at the masjid like we use, like friends and family and stuff. And here in my household, we have scheduled every day to try to group us up, read some Quran, pray Taraweeh together, and yeah, that's it.
Jazakallah khair for sharing. It's definitely been different this year. Who else do we have? Seja, Ali, or go ahead and share your thoughts or introduce yourself. I think you might be on mute. We can probably wait another second or two. And then we could proceed on. And then inshallah, hopefully at the end, after we go through the Seerah, then inshallah, we'll have a discussion about some of the events of the Seerah that we relate to the most, and some examples that we can reflect on. So we'll go ahead and get started with the walkthrough. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Prophet Muhammad was born an orphan without his father, and then at the age of 6, he lost his mother. Then from ages 6 to 8, he was under the care of his grandfather Abdul Muttalib, and then his grandfather passed away at the age when he was 8 years old. And then for the following several years, he was under the care of his uncle Abu Talib. And during this time, he was a shepherd. He then took on being the occupation of being a merchant and trading, going on different trips to trade goods. And it was during this time, when he was at the age of 25, that he got married to Khadija, radiallahu anha, our beloved mother. And then moving forward, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed them with 6 children, 4 being Zainab, Ruqayya, Kulthum, and Fatima, and then also Al-Qasim and Abdullah, and they passed away at a very early age. And then moving forward to the age of 40, where Prophet Muhammad received revelation. It was at the age of 40 in the mountain of Hira, in the month of Ramadan, on Laylatul Qadr, where Prophet Muhammad received the first revelation from Jibreel, angel Jibreel. And at this time, Jibreel had squeezed Prophet very, very hard and asked him to read. And after several times of Prophet saying he does not know how to read, then Jibreel revealed the first verses of the Quran, revealed to Prophet ﷺ. Prophet Muhammad, obviously being very afraid and very fearful at this point. He came back. He went down back to his home, where Khadija radiallahu anha, our beloved mother, took him with care and shared that emotional connection with him to comfort him. And then here's a very important point to note. It was a couple of days later at this time where he spoke to Waraqa, a family member or a relevant to Khadija radiallahu anha. And he spoke to him and he shared with him what he had gone through. And he told Prophet ﷺ that what he had seen was true, and that it was true revelation, and that his people would torture the Muslims, but not only that, but they would kick him out, they would disbelieve in him. And he said that if he had lived longer, he was at an older age, that he would believe in Prophet Muhammad. And if we fast forward many years later to the last year or two of Prophet Muhammad's life, where he had Hajjat al-Wada', he was performing his Hajj, where as reported, 100,000 believers, Muslims, companions were present. So you can see that at the beginning where he was told that it would be a very difficult road for him to take on. You can compare that with, at the end, over 100,000 believers entering the fold of Islam. So that's a true lesson for us in perseverance and in steadfastness. Before we continue, I think okay, there we go. There was just some background noise. So back to the story of Prophet Muhammad. We said that he spoke to Waraqa and he told him that it would be great over the next several years. His people would torture the believers and would not believe in him and would kick him out of his land. So soon after, in the following years, when Prophet ﷺ started spreading Islam, started spreading the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like I mentioned, they were the people of Quraysh and the disbelievers came back with torture, came back with abuse, with persecutions, and the believers continued being steadfast on their religion. And it was during this time where we saw great companions enter the fold of Islam, such as Umar radiallahu anhu and Hamza radiallahu anhu as well. And then years later, Am al-Huzn was the year of sorrow, where Prophet Muhammad lost his wife Khadija and also lost Abu Talib, his uncle, who had stood up for him all this time. After this time, Prophet ﷺ lost his greatest support and realized that the people of Quraysh were not going to support him, and he had to seek support elsewhere. So last time we mentioned his trip to Al-Ta'if, where the leaders of Al-Ta'if commanded the peasants of Al-Ta'if to throw rocks and stones at Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, instead of seeking revenge, when asked by the angel, he was hopeful that a believer would come about from that nation, and that's why he did not want any punishment to take place upon them. So again, you see the message, the mission that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was on, wanting as many Muslims and as many believers to enter the fold of Islam. Then later on, the great trip of Al-Isra wal Mi'raj that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ took, where he overnight traveled to Al-Aqsa in modern-day Palestine, and there he led the prophets in prayer. And then he ascended to the heavens in Al-Mi'raj, where he met some of the prophets there. And then it was during this time where he was commanded, and the 5 daily prayers were prescribed upon him and upon all the Muslims. And then after that, years later, in the year 13 of him receiving revelation, that is when he made his hijrah to Medina. And here, I'd like to mention two small stories as part of his hijrah. One being that before he performed his hijrah, it was during this time where the tribes of Quraysh had made up their mind that the only solution was to kill Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in order to end this religion that affected their lives and their welfare. So they were plotting to kill Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and Prophet ﷺ's concern was before he left for hijrah, his concern was, I need to make sure that their goods and their wealth that they entrusted me with, that they kept with me, I need to make sure that that wealth returns to them. So he instructed Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu to remain in Mecca and to return each of their goods and their wealth to each of the different people that entrusted Prophet Muhammad with their wealth. So you can see you can see the clear difference between their mission and what Prophet ﷺ's mission was. Not only that, but you can also see Prophet ﷺ being able to separate and differentiate between the conflict that he had with them and that they didn't want to believe. He was able to separate between that and the personal affairs, the items that he had to return to them. And I think, just reflecting myself, I think oftentimes when we encounter a conflict with someone, we tend to shut off all interaction and business with that person. And it's very important for us to realize that you might have a conflict with a person on a certain front, but that doesn't mean that you completely shut off your ties with that person and don't associate with them or their families. So that was one piece of the hijrah. And then another piece was before entering Medina, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ stopped by Ma'bad's tent. And Ma'bad was, she lived very close to Medina, but she took on a role of hosting and treating those that often traveled on that path. So it was normal for people that were traveling between Mecca and Medina to stop by her place to, eat something, and that's what Prophet ﷺ had done. So he stopped by her place and he asked her, and he, on this trip, he was with, it was himself, he was also with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and he was with Amir ibn Fuquay-Varina, who was their servant on their trip, and he was also with Abdullah ibn Urayqid, who was a non-Muslim, a non-believer, but was their guide during the trip. As the disbelievers had been following them, he was their guide to take them on routes where they could escape the disbelievers. So when they came to Ma'bad's place, they asked her if she had any food. And she said, no, this year was a very difficult year, that none of the cattle that she had were bearing any, had any milk that she could treat them with. So they asked her, is anything that they could sell in order to, bring food and so on. And she said that she didn't have anything. And then Prophet Muhammad ﷺ looked in the corner and he saw a sheep that looked very, very weak. He asked her whether that sheep had any milk, and she said no. And then he asked her if he could milk the sheep. And she, out of hospitality, she said, yes, you can. So he approached the sheep and he wiped his hand over the sheep, and soon was able to fill a whole container with milk. And then he offered milk to each of the different, he offered milk to Abu Bakr, to Ma'bad, and to the two other men that were with them. before drinking himself. And the reason I mentioned the story is because Ma'bad did not know that Prophet Muhammad was the Prophet. And here is an example where Prophet Muhammad himself went to perform the act. He did not ask his servant, he did not ask someone else to do it for him. He went and he did it himself, and then he offered each of them milk before he drank himself. And the reason I mentioned the story is because my personal reflection on it is nowadays you'll see a lot of people when they meet somebody new, they're very eager to state their title. They're very eager to make an impression and so on. But in this case, Prophet ﷺ, the self-worth that he had and his just being humble, that's not something that he was seeking. And I think that's very important for us, is that when we have that self-drive, when we have that self-worth and we know our mission and our goal of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we don't seek that attention, we don't seek that validation from those around us. And that was very clear in that story. So after Hijrah was complete and Prophet ﷺ was now in Medina, one of the first things was building the masjid, building that community, which is something that I think we can relate to here in the United States, building communities for us to gather. And it was at the masjid where a lot of the companions would gather, and not only would they pray their daily prayers, but they would discuss any affairs that are taking place to that community. And alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, I think we're very fortunate because we're starting to see that grow in our masajid, where it's a community as opposed to just a place to pray. And then after, it is in the next couple of years where you start to see the battles of Badr, Uhud, and Al-Khandaq, where Badr was a great success for the Muslims, for the believers. Uhud was a test and a lesson to the believers to obey Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then Al-Khandaq, which was the battle where the believers remained in Medina, and the disbelievers had gathered 10,000 men, and they approached Medina. And it is in this battle where Prophet ﷺ commanded the companions to dig a trench around Medina. And by digging this trench, that they protected themselves from the Ahzab, from the disbelievers that were surrounding the city. And I mention this because that idea of building or of digging that trench was an idea from one of the great companions, Salman al-Farisi, who was from Persia, who was not originally an Arab. And here I think is a great point in how Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would seek input from his companions. And not only that, but here's an example of where diversity in the group, in the community, really brought forth a great idea. Because this idea was foreign to the Arabs. It was an idea from Persia. And it is with that idea that the believers were able to hold fast during this time for over 20 days. And then after that, the disbelievers, knowing that they had no way in, no way that they could overcome this obstacle, they left Medina. So continuing on, later in the 6th year of Hijrah, there was the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And this treaty was between the believers, Prophet ﷺ and the believers, and between Quraysh. And it was a treaty, a peaceful treaty in order to maintain peace between the two parties. But then soon later, Quraysh, they cut and they broke that treaty with the believers. And at this time, after they broke the treaty, that gave justification for the conquest of Mecca. Because soon later, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, along with 10,000 men conquered and opened Mecca. And you can, subhanAllah, just going back to the beginning days of Mecca, where they were only a few men and they had seen a lot of torture and abuse. Now, many years later, about 20 years later, they were entering Mecca, where they were reopening and conquering Mecca. And a huge lesson here is, even with that great pride and with that great strength that they had, just how humble Prophet Muhammad was when he was entering Mecca, lowering his head and attributing the success to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we mentioned last time how he was very forgiving of the people there in Mecca, and one of them being Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, the son of Abu Jahl, who who gave so much animosity and fought against the Muslims and tortured them and abused them very much. So you can imagine how much the Muslims, or how they felt about Abu Jahl and his son Ikrimah. And Abu Jahl had died during the Battle of Badr. But you can imagine how the Muslims felt about that family. And yet, during the conquest of Mecca, when Ikrimah was approaching the believers, Prophet ﷺ instructed the companions around him to not call him by Ibn Abu Jahl, by the son of Abu Jahl. And Abu Jahl means, it's a name that the companions had called him, which means the father of ignorance. So he told the companions, don't call him by the son of that, because he wanted to respect him. He wanted him to feel welcome into the fold of Islam. So after the conquest of Mecca, then Prophet ﷺ returned to Mecca later in order to do his Hajj, what is Hajjatul Wada'. And in that Hajjatul Wada', you can see the amount of believers that had entered the fold of Islam. It was reported around 100,000 believers were present. And on that day of Arafah, Prophet ﷺ gave Khutbat al-Wada', gave his speech, his sermon, and he told the companions that he might not be there the following year. And then he returned to Medina, and months later, he started feeling ill, and then he passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And to sum it up, Anas bin Malik, one of the great companions, his servant during the time of Medina, he said that when Prophet ﷺ entered Medina, أضاء منها كل شيء, the whole city lit up. And when Prophet ﷺ passed away, the whole city became dark and was filled with darkness. So that is how the companions felt about Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So that was a very brief summary, just going over the highlights, the events, the major events of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's Seerah. Like I said, it's very, very difficult to do Prophet ﷺ's Seerah justice. If you go online and you search on YouTube, or if you open up books, you'll see volumes written on the Seerah, or if you go online, you'll see hundreds of episodes to go into the Seerah. So by no means is this doing it any justice. I was hoping that we could just go over the major events, and then inshallah, at this time, I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'd like to hear your reflections. Is there a particular event that you relate to the most, or that is there a particular story of the Seerah that I might have reminded you of right now that you would like to share? So Jazakumullah khair for listening, and I hope it is beneficial. And we'll open it up for discussion right now.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Okay, so I want to talk about the story with sheep and how Prophet Muhammad, rubbed his hand on it and then milked it, and a lot of milk came out. And when you said it, it just reminded me, of the story, and it was kind of cool, how blessed Prophet Muhammad was, and you know, just by touch of his hand, he like fed a lot of people, and how, you know, he's very generous. You know, he fed everyone before himself. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Jazakallah khair, Saeed, for reflecting on that. Um, yeah, I think very little of us remind ourselves of the blessing that Prophet ﷺ had and that he gave to this ummah. But then also what you shared right now with him being humble and him being generous and sharing it with others before himself. So again, thank you for sharing that. Would anyone else like to share their reflections or a story that they might have connected with the most? Or I guess another question, Suhaib, is inshallah in the next classes, we'll take attributes of Prophet ﷺ's character and we'll focus on those where we'll take a class to discuss, let's say, patience or perseverance or generosity. And inshallah, I'll come with stories of Prophet ﷺ's seerah that reflect that attribute. And then inshallah, we can see what are ways that we can implement that or incorporate that into our lives. Are there any attributes that you would like to hear about, or that you feel that you could incorporate into your life?
I think the Prophet Muhammad's attribute, he was a very trusted person. I think if you can talk about that, that'd be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we discussed about how even on the day of Hijrah, when he was going from Mecca to Medina, they were plotting to kill him, but that trust where he had to return them their goods, like subhanallah, it's very hard to find anyone that could do that separation in their mind. So no, absolutely, I think that'd be a great topic to discuss. Would anyone else like to share any reflections or any thoughts that they have? Okay, so Jazakumullah khair for attending, and inshallah we will pick up on Saturday at 5:30. I hope that you're all able to join, and I hope that you're able to join the Zoom meeting so that we can discuss and learn practical ways to implement parts of the seerah into our daily lives. So again, Jazakumullah khair, barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.